The candle flickered in Martha Whitman's hand. On the other side of her bedroom door, a blizzard howled like a hungry wolf. And James Mallister waited. 3 years she'd been the perfect widow in the small Wyoming town of Medicine Bow. 3 years of black dresses and quiet prayers. 3 years of being respectable. But respectability wouldn't keep her warm tonight. His voice came through the door, rough as prairie wind. "Martha, I can sleep in the barn. Just say the word." The whole town would know by morning. Sheriff Dawson would finally have his excuse. The Methodist ladies would have their scandal, and she would have this one night to remember. Her hand moved to the latch. One twist, and 20 years of being the perfect wife and the perfect widow would burn to ash. Because tonight, this 42-year-old widow was about to make a choice. And that choice was going to unearth a conspiracy that would burn this whole town to the ground. 2 months earlier, James Mallister had walked into her life. Martha stood behind the counter of her general store, a place where numbers never lied and promises were always kept. The bell above the door chimed, and he filled the doorway. 6 feet of trouble in a worn leather coat. He moved like water over stone. Those broad shoulders measured perfectly for her doorway. "Ma'am," he touched his hat brim, and Martha felt something she hadn't felt in 3 long years. The flutter of butterfly wings low in her belly. He said he was looking for land, but the way he looked at her, it wasn't the hungry look of a man sizing up a lonely widow. It was something deeper, like he was seeing past the severe bun and the high collar to the woman she'd buried under years of grief. That Sunday, he was in the back pew of the church. He didn't say a word, just watched. But when the congregation sang Amazing Grace, Martha felt his gaze on her like warm honey, and she nearly forgot the words. After the service, he found her. "Mrs. Whitman," he said, his voice holding a respect that made her feel precious, not pitied. "That was beautiful singing." He asked where a man might get a decent Sunday meal. The boarding house, he'd heard, was terrible. "Mrs. Patterson means well." Martha found herself smiling, but she could burn water. The invitation slipped out before she could stop it. "I always cook too much for just myself." And so it began, a slow, sweet dance in her small kitchen. He told her about cattle trails and the seminary he'd left behind. She told him about her late husband, a good man, but a quiet one. A man who had left a silence in her house so loud she sometimes spoke to her own reflection just to hear a voice. "Loneliness is a peculiar thing," James observed, his sleeves rolled up to reveal strong forearms. "It can make you forget you're still alive." When their hands brushed reaching for a plate, neither pulled away. The town noticed. Conversation stopped when she entered a room. Sheriff Dawson started stopping by her store more often, his visits dripping with false concern. "Mighty friendly with that drifter, Martha," he'd say, leaning too close over her counter. "Man's got no roots. Makes a person wonder." She knew what he was wondering. Dawson had been sniffing around her since her husband's funeral, a vulture waiting for the morning to be over. But James was becoming more than a customer, and the whole town could see it. They saw it in the blue dress she started wearing instead of black. They saw it in the way her hair began to escape its bun. Then came the afternoon it all changed. It started with rain, a sudden, vicious storm that caught her at her husband's grave. She ran for an abandoned line shack, and suddenly he was there, emerging from the downpour like a ghost, his shirt plastered to his chest. Without a word, he wrapped his coat around her shoulders. The warmth of his body still clung to the leather. They stood in that tiny shack, the rain drumming on the roof, the air thick with unspoken things. "Martha," he said. Her name was a prayer and a curse. His hand rose, his fingers tracing her cheek. "You're the most beautiful woman I've ever seen." "I'm 42 years old," she whispered. "And I'm 28, he answered, "and absolutely lost when I look at you." The kiss was gentle and desperate all at once. It tasted of rain and 3 years of loneliness. When they broke apart, she was crying. "This is madness," she breathed. "Then I'm a madman," he said, his forehead pressed against hers. "Because I'm falling in love with you, Martha Whitman, and I don't give a damn what this town thinks about it." But the town thought plenty. The Methodist ladies held an emergency meeting. Sales at her store dropped by half. She was an outcast in her own home. The pressure built until the night Sheriff Dawson cornered James outside the saloon. "Time to move on, Mallister," Dawson warned, his hand on his gun. "Medicine Bow doesn't need drifters sniffing around its decent widows." "Mrs. Whitman is a grown woman," James replied, his voice dangerously calm. "Not while I'm sheriff. She can't be." James walked away that night, but Martha saw the promise of violence in his measured steps. And then the blizzard came. She heard the knocking, desperate and weak. She opened the door to find him, covered in snow, his horse injured. He'd stepped in a gopher hole. He couldn't make it to the boarding house. The unspoken truth hung between them. If he stayed, her reputation would be destroyed. If he left, he might die. She made her choice. And a few hours later, with the storm howling outside, she stood before her bedroom door, her hand on the latch. James waited on the other side. The door swung open. The firelight cast dancing shadows as James rose from his chair. He moved toward her like a man in a trance. His hands framed her face, his thumbs tracing her cheekbones. "You are desired, Martha," he said fiercely. "Every Sunday in that church, I sit there wanting you so badly I can barely breathe." "Show me," she whispered. The kiss was a storm, all hunger and desperation. His hands tangled in her hair, pins scattering. Her carefully constructed bun became a wild cascade of dark waves. She looked younger, freer, alive. She pulled at his shirt, needing to feel his skin, and he shrugged out of it. His chest was broad, his waist lean, a scar tracing a jagged line across his ribs. "How?" she whispered, her fingers tracing the old wound. "Broken bottle in a Denver saloon," he said, his voice rough. "Long story." His hands found the buttons of her dress. "Martha, are you sure? Because once we cross this line—" "I've been sure since the moment you walked into my store." The dress whispered to the floor. She stood before him in just her thin chemise, and his sharp intake of breath was the most beautiful sound she'd ever heard. He laid her on the bed she hadn't shared in 3 years. He worshipped her body, his hands and mouth gentle and fierce by turns. And when he finally joined with her, Martha felt something inside her crack wide open, letting in a light she had forgotten existed. Afterward, they lay tangled together, the blizzard a distant roar. "I love you," he murmured into her hair. "Whatever comes next, remember that." "I love you, James Mallister," she whispered back. But the world came crashing back at dawn. It came in the form of Mrs. Adelaide Patterson, president of the Methodist Ladies, standing on her porch. "Martha Whitman," she announced loud enough for the whole street to hear, "your behavior is a disgrace to this community." By noon, the town had turned its back on her. Her store was empty. But it was Reverend Robinson's visit that truly cut her to the bone. "The man's using you, Martha," the Reverend said, his eyes full of pity. "Once he's had what he wants, he'll move on, like all his kind." The words were a poison, seeping into the cracks of her own self-doubt. James was young, handsome, a drifter. What could he possibly want with a 42-year-old widow? That night, he found her sitting in her darkened store. "Martha," he said, his voice full of a pain that matched her own, "I heard what happened. This is my fault." "Don't," she said, meeting his eyes. "Don't you dare apologize for last night. It was the first time in 3 years I felt alive." He pulled her into his arms. "Then come with me. I bought a place outside town. Marry me, Martha. Today." She wanted to say yes, but before she could speak, a new voice cut through the darkness. "Well, well, the drifter's back at his favorite hunting ground." Sheriff Dawson stepped out of the shadows, his hand resting on his gun. 3 of his men blocked the doors. "I've been asking around about you, Mallister," Dawson sneered. "Turns out you left a trail of trouble through Colorado. A married woman in Billings, wasn't it? Her husband wasn't too happy. Still carries the scars from where you cut him, I hear." Martha's world tilted. The scar, the bar fight. Was it all a lie? "Martha, it's not what he's making it sound like," James pleaded. "Her husband was beating her. I helped her get away." "A real hero," Dawson mocked. He took a step forward, his intent clear. Martha saw how it would end. Blood on her floors. James dead or in a cell. "Stop," she said, her voice a whip crack. She stepped between them. "Sheriff, Your concern is misplaced. This ends now." She walked to the cash register and placed the key to her store on the counter. "I'm leaving Medicine Bow tonight," she announced, her voice cold and dead. "Consider the store a donation to the Methodist ladies." She turned to James, memorizing his heartbroken face. "Thank you," she whispered, "for reminding me I was still alive." And before anyone could stop her, she walked into the back of the store, closing the door on her past, on her town, and on the only man she had ever truly loved. 6 months later, Martha was the proprietor of a successful dress shop in Cheyenne. She had built a new life, a safe life, a lonely life. Then one afternoon, the bell above her door chimed. He stood there, hat in hand, looking older, tireder. "Hello, Martha." "James." Her heart forgot how to beat. "You're a long way from Medicine Bow." "Not as far as you might think," he said, stepping inside. "I sold the ranch." "Why?" "Because it wasn't home without you in it." The simple, honest words shattered her carefully constructed peace. "How did you find me?" "Mrs. Peterson at the boarding house," he said with a half smile. "Turns out she never approved of Dawson's methods." He took a step closer, his eyes searching her face. "Are you content, Martha?" "I am," she lied. "Because I'm not," he said, his voice raw. "I haven't been since the night you walked away." He closed the distance between them. "I'm still in love with you." "The town," she started. "Dawson was voted out 2 months after you left. The town got tired of his bullying." He took her hands. They were trembling. "Martha, I know I have no right to ask, but I'm asking anyway." He knelt, right there on the floor of her shop. He held out a simple gold band. "Marry me," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Let me spend the rest of my life showing you how precious you are." Through the window she could see Cheyenne, the life she had built. Safe, orderly, empty. She looked down at the man kneeling before her, at the unwavering love in his eyes. He wasn't offering her a cage. He was offering her a key. "Ask me again in a year," she whispered. His face fell. "Give me a year," she continued, a slow smile spreading across her face. "To be sure this is what I want, not what I'm running from. If you're willing to wait, ask me then." He stood, understanding dawning in his eyes. "You want me to court you properly?" "I want to be sure that when I say yes," she said, touching his cheek, "it's forever." He caught her hand, pressing it to his heart. "Then I'll wait however long it takes." As he turned to go, she called his name. "James, there's a boarding house 2 blocks down. Mrs. Chen makes excellent apple pie." His smile was like the sun breaking through the clouds. "I'll keep that in mind." The door closed, leaving Martha alone with the scent of leather and the promise of a future. But their story was far from over. Because what neither of them knew was that Sheriff Dawson hadn't just been voted out of office, he had vanished. And he'd taken a secret with him, a secret about Martha's late husband, a secret worth killing for. And he was coming back to Medicine Bow to collect. The year of courtship was a revelation. James Mallister, it turned out, was a man of hidden depths. He established a small freight business in Cheyenne, working with a quiet determination that quickly earned him respect. Every Sunday, without fail, he would appear at Martha's shop, a bouquet of wildflowers in his hand. They walked by the river. They attended church socials. He read poetry to her in the evenings, his deep voice turning the words into music. He never pushed, never pressed. He simply waited, his love a steady, patient fire. He told her the full story of the woman in Billings. Her husband was a brutal man, a friend of Sheriff Dawson's. James had helped her escape to her family in California. The husband had come after him with a knife, and James had defended himself. Dawson had twisted the story to use as a weapon. Martha, in turn, began to open up. She spoke of her marriage to Henry Whitman, a good man, but a distant one. A man more interested in his ledgers than his wife. A marriage of quiet, respectable loneliness. He was sick for a long time before he died, she confessed one evening, and his brother Silas came to help with the store. But Silas, he was not a good man. James's hand tightened on hers. What did he do? He was cruel to Henry. He was forward with me. She looked away, the memory still sharp. I sent him away a week before Henry passed. I never told anyone. I was too ashamed. James was quiet for a long moment. "You have nothing to be ashamed of, Martha." As the year drew to a close, Martha knew her answer. The love she felt for James was real, solid, built on a foundation of truth and trust. On the anniversary of his arrival in Cheyenne, he came to her shop. He didn't have to kneel this time. He just stood before her, his eyes asking the question. "Yes," she said, her voice clear and strong. "Yes, James, I'll marry you." The wedding was small and simple. They were married by a justice of the peace, with Mrs. Chen and her husband as witnesses. They bought a small house on the edge of Cheyenne, and for 6 months Martha knew a happiness she had never imagined possible. Then the telegram arrived. It was from Sheriff Miller, the new lawman in Medicine Bow. "Mrs. Whitman, urgent, body found. Silas Whitman, murdered. Please return at once." The world stopped. Silas, her dead husband's brother, murdered. The news was a cold stone in her stomach. "I have to go back," she told James, her face pale. "We go back," he corrected, his arm a solid weight around her shoulders. "Together." Medicine Bow had not changed. The same dusty street, the same watchful eyes. But this time, Martha was not alone. Sheriff Miller was a young, earnest man, clearly out of his depth. "We found him in the old line shack near your husband's grave," Miller explained. "Been dead a while. A single gunshot." He hesitated. "Mrs. Whitman, Martha, we found this in his pocket." He handed her a small, tarnished silver locket. She opened it. Inside was a tiny, faded portrait of her. "He was obsessed with you," Miller said gently. "After you sent him away, he never left the area. Lived like a hermit. People said he was crazy. But there was something else. A half-burned letter. The words were mostly gone, but a few fragments remained. Dawson, the deal, Whitman's ledger. Proof. "My husband's ledgers?" Martha frowned. "They're just store accounts." "Maybe not," James said, his eyes dark with thought. He looked at the sheriff. "Dawson, where is he?" "That's the other thing," Miller said, rubbing the back of his neck. "He's back. Rode in last night like he still owned the place. He's been asking questions. About you, Martha, and about some final ledger of your husband's." Suddenly, it all made a terrible kind of sense. Henry's long illness, Silas's cruelty, Dawson's obsession with her. It wasn't about her at all. It was about something her husband had left behind. Something worth killing for. They went to the store, now run by a nervous young man who was happy to turn the keys back over to Martha. In the back office, they found Henry's old safe. "I never knew the combination," Martha said. "Maybe you don't need to," James said. He ran his fingers along the frame of the portrait of Henry that hung above it. It was just like the one in her husband's office. He found the loose edge and peeled the canvas back. There was nothing there, just bare wood. Of course, Silas would have known Henry's tricks. He must have found it years ago. That's why Dawson had killed him. He wanted the ledger for himself. But as Martha stared at the empty space, a memory stirred. Henry, in his last lucid days. "Everything is in order, my dear," he'd whispered. "The last account is the most important. Remember the first day. The very first. The first day." She looked around the dusty office. The first ledger they had ever used. It was on the bottom of a tall stack. She pulled it out. It was heavy. She opened it to the first page. The first entry. April 12th, 1856. Our beginning. Tucked into the spine of the book was a single, folded piece of paper. It wasn't a ledger. It was a signed confession. Henry Whitman's confession. Detailing how he and a young, ambitious deputy named Frank Dawson had systematically cheated local ranchers out of their land claims, using doctored deeds and legal threats. They had built Medicine Bow on a foundation of fraud. Silas had known and had used it to blackmail his own brother. Henry, dying and full of guilt, had left the proof behind. The door to the office burst open. Frank Dawson stood there, a smoking pistol in his hand. Sheriff Miller lay on the floor behind him. "I'll take that," Dawson said, his eyes fixed on the paper in Martha's hand. James moved, placing himself in front of her. But Dawson wasn't alone. 3 of his old deputies stood with him. "It's over, Dawson," James said, his voice level. "It's just beginning." Dawson sneered. Once I have that, I have this whole valley, just like we planned. He raised his pistol, but a new voice, sharp and clear, cut through the tension. Drop it, Dawson. Mrs. Adelaide Patterson stood in the main store, flanked by a dozen ranchers, all holding rifles. They had seen Dawson shoot the sheriff. The town had finally had enough. Dawson stared, his face a mask of disbelief. He was trapped. With a snarl of rage, he lunged, not at James but at Martha, trying to snatch the confession. James was faster. He met Dawson's charge, the two men crashing to the floor. A single shot echoed in the store. For a moment, no one moved. Then James rolled away, a dark stain spreading on his sleeve. Dawson lay still, his own pistol still smoking in his hand. He had shot himself in the struggle. The reign of Frank Dawson was over. Weeks later, James, his arm in a sling, stood with Martha on the hill where they had once planned a picnic. The town of Medicine Bow was healing, its future now in the hands of its own people. My husband wasn't a good man, Martha said quietly, but in the end, he tried to do the right thing. James took her hand. And you, Martha Whitman, you did the brave thing. You chose truth. She looked at him, at the unwavering love in his eyes. She thought of the gold ring he still carried in his pocket. Is your offer still open? She asked, a slow smile spreading across her face. He didn't have to answer. He just pulled her close and kissed her, a promise sealed under the wide Wyoming sky. Their journey had been a storm of secrets and lies, but they had found their shelter, finally, in each other. If you enjoyed this story of hidden secrets and second chances, click the video on your screen now to watch another tale where love and justice collide on the unforgiving frontier. And don't forget to subscribe. Your support means everything to us.